Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to Capricorn Radio with your host, James Swagger. Today I'm going to be talking to Fritz Zimmermann about his book, The Nephilim Chronicles. And Fritz has looked into the earthworks and the henges on the mounds of the Ohio Valley and on the East Coast, and something that I have delved into a little bit in my research over in the British Isles, but Fritz has also been over this way looking and researching at the British Isles and some of the Nephilim links to the Middle East as well. So what a fascinating show we have today. Just before we bring on Fritz, I just want to mention CapricornRadio.com. You can follow the links for the archives there, all the guests and their biographies, and the links to all their books. Also, we're on Twitter at Capricorn Radio. You can also follow the YouTube channel there on CapricornRadio.com. Follow the links, or simply type into YouTube, James Swagger, DOTCOM. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest today. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, Fritz.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, wow, what an awesome, fascinating subject. You've been researching this for quite a while, Fritz. You know, this is a wealth of research that you have provided in your books, and I guess, you know, like anybody on the show, give us a little bit about your background. Did you get drawn into this by some accident, some little serendipitous accident, or was it a case of, you know, you've been researching history for a while, or how did that happen for you?
Well, I have a degree in radio, television, communications from Purdue University here in Indiana. And this started out, it was going to be a short documentary, and I wanted to find just several mounds here in Northeast Indiana, because I had no idea we had anything that was 2,000 years old in this region. And as I started researching, I kept finding these large skeletons. And then part two of the book is that I have the travel guide, the Nephilim Chronicles, a travel guide to the ancient ruins in the Ohio Valley. And I was doing the field work. Well, I end up finding over 300 of these large skeletons, and I actually did field work. I investigated 700 mound sites in the Ohio Valley, which is 5 states, and that took 13 years. So in my travel guide, I have 222 mound and earthworks that you can go and visit. So finding the giants was one thing. Finding out where the giants came from and the whole backstory, that took a few years. So altogether, 13 years of field work and other research just to tell this story, put those links together from the biblical Levant and the biblical giants, how they made their way into the British Isles, across Europe, and then eventually came here to the Ohio Valley.
Wow, yeah, and you're in Northeast Indiana at the moment, is that correct, Fritz?
Yes.
What's the quantity of mounds up that region then?
Well, I'm in Northeast Indiana. We do have mounds up in this region, but the larger mounds and the hinges are in central Indiana, so they're about an hour and a half south of here.
Oh, sure.
I'm in the northern fringe of where all the big skeletons and the hinges and the really large burial mounds are.
You know, I'd never heard of henges. I knew there was mounds in the Ohio Valley, but I'd never heard of henges. And I just, like I said in our pre-chat there, we've got some information to roll out about the henges over here and more links. But henges, mounds, this just screams British Isles to me. You know, this is like, wow, it's like, you know, there's obviously a commonality. You know, you got different cultures, yes, different times maybe. You know, there's an obvious link there, Fritz, you know?
Well, yeah, they're, it's sacred geometry and how those match up in over there in the British Isles and then over here. And just to clarify, when people think henge, a henge is a circular earthwork with an interior ditch, an outer wall, and then generally a gateway that is going to align to a solar event. So you have Stonehenge, you have the stones in the middle. The hinge is the earthwork and that gateway that is aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. So when I say henge, I'm not necessarily talking about stones in the middle, because over in the British Isles, there's some with stones and some with burial mounds in the center of them. That's what you would find over here. You'd have a henge aligned to a solar event, and then generally there's a mound in the center with burials in it.
Yeah, we have one called here, believe it or not, called the Giant's Ring. It's an earthwork it's inside Belfast City, actually, Fritz. And it's got a dome. Not many people know about it, but it's one of the largest henges known, if not the largest. And it's got a dolmen in the center of it, right in the center of the henge. It's massive, like, you know. But yeah, I mean, fascinating. Like, henges are literally, you know, forgotten about. They're just not exciting to people. Like, but I think what you've done and we're going to get into some numerology later. You've applied some numerology to this stuff and looked at these, and my own, I've overlooked some of the stuff for henges too, Fritz. I guess just on the mounds before we go anywhere with the henges, you don't believe in digging these things up, Fritz, is that correct?
No, absolutely not. Here in North America, archaeologists have literally destroyed thousands of burial mounds, and they don't know who the mound builders were, where they came from, nor where they went, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the mounds have just become a venue for archaeologists to write papers and get published in academic journals. And so since they don't believe in diffusion, they believe in the Beringia theory, that is the peopling of North America through the ice bridge across Alaska over into Asia. And if it doesn't follow that paradigm, it is completely dismissed, and archaeologists aren't allowed to write diffusionist papers. If they do, they'll be censored, and in a world of publish or perish, their careers will die right there. So everything is being governed by the universities as far as diffusion, which they don't believe in. So that topic is left out of mainstream media and as a topic that should be considered far more than what it is. Because in my book, I've definitely proved that there was diffusion and these people. Skeletal types that you will find, skull types of the Beaker people who built Stonehenge, are identical to what you'll find here in the Ohio Valley. And that is 3 different people, the corded people that have long heads. You have the Denaric that have these flattened back of the heads. Some may be tied to the Fomorians. And then you had another one that was called Borby, Cro-Magnon or Borby, that type skulls. But all 3 of those were kind of weird upper Paleolithic Cro-Magnon type skulls you would find over in the British Isles, and you find those here in the Ohio Valley. So you have a skull type that matches conical mounds with circles going around them, hinges, same skull type. It's hard to believe that no one has put that together up to this point.
I know, Fritz. This is a no-brainer if you ask me. This is like, oh my God, soak this up, down tools, get all the research focused on this. But, you know, like you talked about the archaeological politics that goes on, I'm with you on that, Fritz. I mean, when you look at all the mounds in Ireland, which has got a lot of art to go with the mounds, and in doing so, that's what I researched and wrote about, Fritz, and that's why Mark put us together for the show. But the archaeologists never hired an astronomer to look at an astronomically aligned monument. They won't do it. They won't bring in the astronomers to look at the astronomy. They don't want to deal with it. It's ridiculous, like, you know. Are you finding the exact same, that the archaeologists are hands off on these monuments? They're their monuments, nobody else's.
Absolutely. Just in the last 10 years, if you can imagine the trail that these archaeologists have made to these earthwork sites, just in the last 10 years, somebody said, we think these are solar aligned. We think these have lunar alignments. Unbelievable that just now they're coming to that conclusion, that these were built for a purpose. They were solar and lunar observatories, and to, you know, pay homage to those deities that those earthworks were created for.
Wow. You know, it's like, you know, the thing is, I mean, the people have been talking about astronomical alignments, but they've just been ignoring them. And then they realize it themselves, and it's like, it's this new phenomenon to them, even though it's like they can't hear what the people are saying. It's bizarre that this goes on in our society. It's bizarre.
And they don't want to make those ties to the biblical Amorites. And we can go back to Babylon and look at the symbolism of a circle with a dot in the middle of it was a sun. And when you look at the earthwork, there are circles with dots. So the symbolism is all identical, that all came, or origins are from the Levant with the Amorites. Those were the accounted giants in the Bible. Of course, academia here, anything that deals with the Bible is dismissed and aggressively dismissed. Wow. And it's the same over there. When I watch shows from the British Isles, like, the only thing is like, you know, their archaeologists are as inept as the ones we have here.
They're all cut from the same cloth, as we say, Fritz. They're all cut.
They are.
You know, and the funny thing is the circle with the dot in the middle, again, you know, it's reminiscent of Irish rock art. You know, I think something like 45% of the rock art of Europe is within one location, within 2 mile radius in one location in Ireland. It's like 45% of the rock art, and it's so little known about, because they won't bring in the astronomers to make some sort of it's interpretation. They want to dig up the bones, they want to dig up the stones, and if they can't find it in the earth, in the ground, and dig something up, they're not happy. We could go on for hours on the archaeological shortcomings, I suppose, Fritz. I guess what's the respect for your books from archaeology standpoint? Are they shunning it, I suppose, or are they resisting it?
Well, any bad review that I have on my book is archaeologists buying my book just to say something bad about it. However, they've never said anything about my theories because they can't refute those.
Wow.
Because I have the evidence is there. I can show you a skull from England and a skull that they pulled from a burial mound in Ohio, and they're identical. And they're such weird-looking skulls that they have to be the same people.
Yeah.
And they can't refute that. And a big point here is because, we're so politically correct over here, is for me to say that there were Caucasians that came to North America would be labeled as a racist statement, which is not the case at all. It's just trying to get to the truth. If they were Chinese, that's what we'd be talking about. If they were from somewhere else in Africa, we'd be talking about that. That's where the evidence points to. Actually, I had a skull that I sent to the most renowned anthropologist in North America from a burial mound in Ohio, and I told him that the origin was unknown. He labeled it as Caucasian and then recanted his statement when I told him that the skull actually was from a burial mound in Ohio.
Wow.
So that's from the top. That's from the guy that's looked at something like 10,000 skulls. And he said, yeah, that has Caucasian aspects to it.
Wow.
So,
well, if the evidence is there,
a little sneaky.
Yeah, if the evidence is there, Fritz, the evidence is there. That's the way I see it. Unfortunately, I know in America that the race card gets pulled far too often. I suppose this Beringia Strait problem. This is a major problem because I think the Clovis theory has kind of knocked that out of the water as well. And it's a case now. I think who didn't discover America? There was a lot of peoples there. I suppose. They to get rid of the Beringia Strait theory, they're talking about a frozen ice sheet to get across the North Atlantic now to try and get the people there because they don't want to accept that people might have come by boat. Would you see an ancient circumnavigation, an ancient sea people as who these guys were, Fritz?
Yes, there is. And, actually my book is in two parts. The first part is about the maritime archaic. Those were also very large people. And there is a similar material culture that we can track across Northern Europe, across the Urals, into Asia, Japan, back over into the west coast of North America, coming down Oregon, California. And the same identical thing is coming across the Atlantic coast here, where we'll find the same skeletal types. They're large. They have the same material culture. They were maritime archaic, so we find harpoons and some other things like plummets, which we'll also find in Europe. And a plummet is just kind of a weird-looking thing that actually looks like a plummet. But we find those all across the northern tier, and that's what ties these people together as far as one artifact. It's just so odd that it obviously was the same people that were making those. But those were large people that were coming across between 7,000 BC and 2,000 BC. And then the second part of the book is about the Amorites or the Nephilim giants, had their origins in the Bible and how those tied in with what you have there in Ireland and the British Isles, and how those are identical as far as mound types, skull types, as what we would find here in the Ohio Valley. So actually there were two waves. It was probably the maritime archaic that let the Amorites, who were metal traders, know that there was vast copper deposits up at Isle St. Royal right at the advent of the Bronze Age, when bronze was basically gold. They couldn't get enough of this because they were making weapons to supply the Hittite and the Egyptian armies for this. And that was why they came to North America, which is usually the case, which is economic. There was money to be made over here. So that's what brought that second wave of Amorites from England. Of course, we know Stonehenge is right next to 10 mines. So 10 that you need to make bronze certainly had something to do with Stonehenge also being constructed, around 2700 BC.
Wow, I'm glad you said that, Fritz, because you talk about two waves, and what I've realised in the Irish and the Brittany megaliths is that it looks like we have two waves of megalithic works, megalithic construction. You have this 5000 BC wave, and you have a 3500, 3200 BC wave. Perhaps rising sea levels, sunken land masses, something like that. I'm not too sure. But yeah, it seems to be these megalithic hotspots. Sligo Bay in the west of Ireland. There's a 5000 BC group of monuments, and then there's nothing for a couple of thousand years, and then there's 3000 BC pops up again. Wow. I suppose let's talk about the copper. Isn't there copper deposits? There's a massive amount of copper unaccounted for in the Great Lakes region.
There's something like 50,000 tons they can't account for. But they were aggressively mining that. There is something like 10,000 pits up at Isle St. Royal. And the reason why they went after this so aggressively is it's 99.9% pure. That means it wasn't dirty. They didn't have to cook it. You just pulled it out of the ground and off it went. So it was very advantageous to get it from here. Besides copper, deposits were being depleted in Europe and over into the Middle East. So they were looking for copper all around across the world. So probably their ties with the Maritime Archaic what eventually brought them here, just to know that, the vast amounts of copper that they obviously needed. So there's 50,000 tons missing. Where did it go? My guess is that it went into swords and knives for the Hittite and Egyptian armies.
Wow. Yeah, and it's such a high grade copper as well. There's a way of identifying it, isn't there? It's got that 99.7% purity. This was like gold to these guys.
Yeah, and you can identify it because the one impurity is silver, so it'll have little silver specks in it. And they've even found Egyptian bowls that had this speck of silver in it, and they knew that it come from Isle St. Royal. But again, because that doesn't follow the paradigm that the archaeologists want to propose, that is dismissed. So we found it over in Egypt.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. I love the layout of your book because you've tackled a lot of key things. There's mysteries like you just talked about, the missing copper. There's like the giants, there's the mounds, the earthworks, the links between our Western Europe and the eastern coast America. These are all key things tying together in a very unique story that hasn't really been addressed, Fritz. What's the? Is this been welcomed by anybody? Is there a massive resistance to this theory or knowledge?
Well, there's two camps. I mean, there certainly is a large contingent of people that are diffusionists in this country, but when you have the universities and the universities control the media, so
Agreed.
we're a little more underground because the media isn't going to say or admit, or archaeologists aren't going to admit that they've been wrong all these years and then tout me as the guy that actually straightened it all out. I don't think that's going to happen.
Tell me about the skeletons, Fritz, because this is the key thing for me. I mean, we're talking over 7 foot, Fritz, yeah?
Oh, yeah. 7 is generally the bottom of the tier that I would have included a skeleton in the book. But 7 to about 9'6" are the largest that we have.
Wow, that's monstrous. We can't even. Our tallest human is what, just under 8 foot, like. So we can't even comprehend anything.
Yeah. And also in my book, I have a section about Britain. I have 3 chapters about the Amorites coming to Britain, and I also in our. You may not know this, but Fort Wayne has the second largest genealogical library in the country. And all of your histories, all the counties of Ireland, all the counties of England, we have those in our library. And so I was able to go through these books written in the 1700s, and I found something like 20 different historical accounts of them getting mounds and there being large skeletons in Ireland, Scotland, and England. So there is a section in there that has these accounts of them getting large skeletons from those burial mounds.
Have you been over this part of the world, Fritz, to Ireland, Britain?
I have not. I have not.
I got to get you out here, Fitz. You'd love this place. You've been to quite a few mounds in America, haven't you? You've been to like probably more than anyone I know at the moment. Like,
Yeah, I've been to just about all of them, just to investigate to see if they were there or not and photograph them. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of them. And I think one thing is just the mounds with the circles going around them, and how that duplicates itself in England and Ireland. And we also find those mounds in Syria, Jordan. There's burial mounds with circles going around them.
The skeletons, sorry, just back to skeletons, Fritz. Where are these skeletons at now? The Smithsonian has grabbed a few of these and lost them, apparently. Is there a conspiracy there with the Smithsonian?
I think there has to be, because there is over 100 accounts of someone would have found a large skeleton, and then they would say, well, the Smithsonian is en route to come get it. Come get the skeleton, and then after they got it, then nobody ever knew what happened to it again. And this is like hundreds of accounts of the Smithsonian in the 1800s taking a train to some small town in the Midwest where they reported finding a large skeleton. They were aggressively getting these skeletons. And a lot had to do with that the person that was the head of the Smithsonian at the time was sympathetic to Native Americans. And even though people were touting that there was an ancient race here that was not Native American, he wanted to squash that. And the only way to do that was to get these skeletons that were Caucasian and could be identified as Caucasian. So, yes, there is a cover-up.
Wow. It's a no-brainer, isn't it? It's another no-brainer. These guys have basically been scrubbing the American history out of the record, the real American history out of the record.
Yeah, it's put us in the dark ages here as far as history goes, all because of political correctness that actually started 150 years ago.
Wow. I've had Scott Walter on the show from America History Unearthed, the program on History Channel 2, and, I have a newfound interest in American history, and I think American history is being revived on a daily basis as we speak, and it's guys like yourself, Fritz, are out there doing the research, and you've put a lot of time into this, I can see, with the research that you've done. And the thing is, you tie it in with the Middle East. We're going to talk probably about the Nephilim. Give us the biblical account of the Nephilim and why this story orates so well with the mound builders and the evidence of the giants and all that.
Well, of course I put the biblical accounts in there. Genesis 6:4, there were giants in those days when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. That was what created this race of giants. That is kind of a, people's interpretation on that. I really don't get too particular on that. Some say that,
Sure.
It was born of angels. Some say it was genetic manipulation. Some people will interpret the angels were actually aliens. I think that's more of your Anunnaki crowd. But there was genetic manipulation. Now, my theory, based on science, is that these were a Cro-Magnon Neanderthal hybrid. Because in most counts we find on these skeletons, protruding brow ridge, massive jaw, no forehead or a slanted forehead. So many of the types of skulls look almost more Neanderthal than they do modern humans. But I think it was that genetic manipulation that was the seed to create the giant race. And so I have lots of photos of Cro-Magnon skulls and skulls that they have found in various parts, and point out some things on there that this was a hybrid race.
And a double row of teeth as well.
Yeah, double rows of teeth. It's interesting that in the Babylonian Talmud it says that some of the giants over there in the biblical lands had double rows of teeth. Of course, there's a story of the Fomorians. Fomorians is root word Mor or Muru or Amorite, that the Fomorians also had double rows of teeth. And I have, I think, 25 accounts of them finding large skeletons here with that same genetic dental abnormality.
Wow. Something I've looked into, because I found some links myself with the Dogon tribe of West Africa, who are a black race of people, and they have a lot of astronomy and celestial lore. And, I've looked into this, and I've looked at some of the mythology of Ireland, of the Fir Bolg, the Fomorians, the Tuatha De Danann, and Tuatha De Danann basically means other race of people. They referred to these builders as another race of people, coming from, by the way, the Western Seas. But we don't know of anything other than the Western Seas, other than America. Like, so they either came from America or sunken landmass. And I just think the mythology matches up with some of the historic accounts is fascinating. I think that the mythology, I used to not look at mythology. And it's nice to see you put some biblical stuff in there, because if it fits, it's open to some interpretation. I agree with that. Do you look at mythology as well?
Well, yeah, there's a kernel of truth to almost every story. Of course, they've been elaborated on, but almost every ancient civilization has stories of giants. Native Americans have many stories of an ancient giant race, which they called white Indians, that lived in North America. And so there's different tribes of Algonquins and Iroquois and, people that are separated that all share the same story, and that say that they were white-skinned. So, yeah, there's something to that. And you could go a lot of different places across the world that'll talk about an ancient giant race. So it's just odd that people are about the same time frame all over the world are talking about these people.
Sure. Fritz, just take a moment to give out the name of your book, The Nephilim Chronicles, where we can get it, and a website or anything else you need to tell us.
Well, the book on the giants, it chronicles their story. It's The Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels in the Ohio Valley. And then my travel guide is The Nephilim Chronicles, a travel guide to the ancient ruins in the Ohio Valley. And both of those are available on Amazon. Amazon UK, I believe.
Amazon US, Amazon UK. I'm looking at it now, and I'll provide links on the biography page too for the listeners. I have to say, on the cover, you talk about the enclosure and the 666 feet measurements. Tell me about that, Fritz, because I think this is fascinating. I got some information I was just sharing with you as well, because when I read about it, I just went straight to a place that I know in Ireland, and I applied your theory of the measurements. And they're there, Fritz. The measurements are there, like you said in the book. So let's elaborate on the 666, what that means, and the 555 for that matter.
Well, there's two numbers that was developed by the Amorites. When they took Babylon in 1950 BC, there was they developed the mathematics, high mathematics or advanced mathematics, pi, square root. All of that was formulated by the Amorites, who were the accounted giants in the Bible, 1950 BC. There's also a numerical codex that they derived called Gematria. And in Gematria, the two most basic numbers are 666 represents the sun god, the male deity. 1080 represents the female earth or lunar mother. So 1080 and 666 are the two key numbers. And then over here in the Ohio Valley, hinges, which of course are solar temples, those are either 660 feet in circumference or 666 feet in circumference. And then the square, which represents the four winds, which is, number 4 has always been symbolic of the Earth Mother. We have these squares with each side being 1,080 feet. We also have different linear works that are 1080, and so the symbolism always matches the number. So squares are 1080s, circles are 660s or 666. So they follow that, and that certainly cannot be serendipitous that those numbers would show up in feet if they were not using feet. And we already know the Ohio Ethnographic Society said that they were using an exact form of the foot. The Babylonians used what was called a duodecimal system, which is a base 12. Of course, we still use that today. Well, you know, we're still on the foot here in America.
I use both.
Inches.
I use both. But yeah, we're in the metric now. But yeah, this ancient, it's an ancient measurement, isn't it? This 6 and the 12 and that.
Yeah, they've done some measurements with feet at Stonehenge, and all those numbers show up. 555 shows up, 1080 shows up, 666 shows up, and so the mathematicians that were doing that were also using the foot in some degree, just because that numerology shows up. Now, we also have earthworks here that are 555 feet in circumference. 555 is an interesting number because times pi is 1746, which is a sum total of 1080 and 666. And that really is the basis that you have to know about the religion and the earthworks, is that it's an equal balance, a yin-yang, where you always wanted an equal balance of Earth Mother and the sun. So we have like earthworks that are a circle and a square that are attached, and they'll be of equal area. It means they had to have known how to square a circle to make the circle and the square have equal area. But the religion behind that is an equal balance of both the sun and the earth. You don't want too much sun because it'll burn the crops. You don't want too much earth. It'll high winds and floods and everything else. So it's always trying to achieve that balance. And Stonehenge, Avebury, all of those were built with that in mind, is that equality of the powers.
Wow. You know, the thing is, I don't know if you've ever looked at the diameters. Maybe it's a slightly different, but I just plugged in the data and looked at it myself. The diameter of the giant, it's called the Giant's Ring, by the way. It's in Belfast. It's in one of the largest henges in Ireland, and it's got a diameter of 666 feet. And the other second biggest henge in Ireland is called Henge, and it's got a diameter of 555 feet. So I don't know what the diameter would say, but they both again have they're exact same as the henge on your cover of your book, and the two diameters are in feet, you know. I don't know what that would signify.
Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
So there you have that over there. We have the same thing over here where we have the 555 showing up, and then we also have 666.
I know.
Again,
the two biggest henges.
How could that not be the same people?
I know. It's like I never got a chance. See, I researched passage graves because they had a lot of art and they have alignments, and that's the astronomy. I also looked into the acoustics of some ancient monuments. So I've been full of the research on different tangents, and I never got a chance to look at henges in detail. But I just looked at it today, Fritz, just before you came on the show, and I went, well, let's look at the measurements here. And I was stupefied. I was like, oh my God, the first two biggest henges in Ireland have 666 and 555, just like you said, Fritz. You know, so.
And if you want to see another comparison that will really impress you, look at a comparison between Portsmouth, Ohio, and Avebury. They're identical.
Wow.
A long serpent that is wrapped around a solar henge, the serpent wrapping around that, which, you know, has to do with the renewal of that. There's also Earth Mother symbolism attached with Avebury. Some believe Avebury is actually one of the accounted giant tribes called the Avum that they talk about, that somehow they may be related, and all the AV names that are around that area. But look at a picture of Avebury and Portsmouth, Ohio, and they are identical earthworks.
Wow, fascinating. I've had an Avebury researcher on the show, and I'm pretty well versed in Avebury, but not Portsmouth, Ohio, so I can't wait to do that, Fritz. I really can't. This is a minefield of research, Fritz. This is like, you know, this is open doors now. This is like, please, everybody get involved in this, because it's not being done by the mainstream. This has been done like people like yourself and myself, Fritz, or anybody who's outside now. It's an alternative research community that are doing this. No.
And it's growing.
And it's growing, exactly. And I'm glad to see it's growing because, you know, I had an interest in this about 15 years ago, but I never did much research until about 5 years ago, Fritz. You know, I just sat looking at it for 10 years. But tell me about the serpents, because you wrote about serpents in the book, and it's something I've also researched in over here.
Well, you know, the serpent is a lot more prolific in the Ohio Valley than just the Serpent Mound. Of course, that's the most popular, you know, that most people would recognize. But the hinges generally have like an undulation on the outside of them, and those are serpentine. And we go to Fort Hill, and there's serpentine representations. So like serpents are everywhere. But an interesting tie with the British Isles is that the serpent at Ohio has three bends in its body, and it's pointing to the confluence of three creeks. There's another serpent in Oban, Scotland, that's very similar to that. It's pointing to three peaks in the distance. Its body goes three times. Wow. It had like a fire pit where the head was, almost identical to the one in Ohio. So there's some really interesting similarities between the serpent at Oban and the serpent at in Ohio.
Wow, fascinating. The thing that I looked into, what got me into the serpent research was that, well, the Celts are known to have been serpent cults, and The Celts were pagans and they were stamped out by the Romans and the Christian church. But I mean, they have pictures of them holding serpents, and I liken it to maybe they had a lost ayahuasca type brew, and that's maybe why they researched. That's why they indoctrinated the serpent into their religion stroke behaviorism. I mean, they drew a lot of their art in Ireland, well, serpentine squiggles and stuff, you know. Of course, the serpent is synonymous with an ayahuasca type brew, because I looked into the acoustics as this exploring their consciousness. So maybe that's just one facet. I just think that the serpent pops up in America as well. It's just another a major commonality that is just, you know, it hits a home for me. It hits a home.
Yeah, it is. It's eerie similarities.
Eerie is right. You know, I guess. Tell me about gematria principles. I think you touched on it there. This is going back to the Amorites. This was they founded all this. This is their esoteric knowledge, if you will.
Yeah, they had, the magic square and, the numerology. Most people, 666, they think of Revelations, and they think of, all that ties in with the beast and et cetera. However, 666 is used two other times in the Bible. In one case, it's a man named Adonakam who's escaping Babylon, and with him is 666 people. Of course, Adonakam is probably in reference to Adonis, which was the Phoenician sun god. And then in another instance, they bring Solomon, 666 talons of gold. But let's just look at the name Solomon. Sol is Latin for sun. Am is Hindi for sun. An is Egyptian for sun. Solomon means sun, sun, sun. And if you take the O, which is the 15th letter in the alphabet, and you drop that down, you have 3 15s, which is probably an anagram of 1 plus 5, 1 plus 5, 1 plus 5. The name Solomon means 666.
Wow.
And they give him 666 talons of gold. Reference to the Amorite Gematria, that 666 is reference to the sun and not generally that of the Antichrist or the beast. So it is used 3 times. One time it's in Revelations, and through that it's been contorted to kind of out of its original context to mean the sun.
How far back do these Amorite people go? Give me a BC date.
Well, I think when they go into Babylon around 1950 BC is really when they're most noticeable on the historical radar, where we can establish the people and writings and numerology and symbolism and take those icons and move those across the world and see where they match up. So, but then of course they were earlier, but it's a little harder to get things in that 3000 BC era just because just isn't documented that well. But of course around 2700 BC they were interested in mining copper and tin, because that was the advent of the Bronze Age. So yeah, let's go like 2700 BC. Of course, they came into England and built Stonehenge and built all the mounds around there. All those mounds around Stonehenge with the circles going around them, all that is a prototype of exactly what you'll find in the Ohio Valley. There's no mound in England that we can't find its double over in Ohio.
Wow. This is fascinating, Fritz. This is totally fascinating. I mean, these guys like the Amorites, I mean, when they come into existence, let's say on the historical radar, I mean, right at the earliest point in culture, these guys are talking language, math, geometry, sophisticated stuff, like, where we don't think of that era. We think of these mound builders or these megaliths as stone and earth and nothing worth looking at. But there's mathematics, geometry, ideology, symbology. And of course, these guys created our alphabet. Is that right? These guys created language as well.
Yeah. Yeah, basically the alphabet that we use today came from the Semitic language. And, that eventually would become the alphabet that we use today. When you look at a clock that's 12 hours, you're looking at Amorite numerology. Of course, here we have the foot. You're looking at that. When you look at a calendar with 12 months, whenever you see the number 12, that's Amorite. Wow. That's base 12, duodecimal. Yeah, a lot of it survived today.
Wow.
The king of the giants that they talk in the Bible was Og.
Wow.
OG. Of course, where we have the Magog in England, we have the Magog in Russia. They were all known for being very large. Language today. When you Google something, Google is the all-knowing Og. So words like cognizance and many words that we use today certainly have that root of Og, which is actually basically a sun deity.
Sure. Tell me about this haplo-X link. This is key, because this is the stuff that I love. This is the scientific links. This is my left brain kicking in, Fritz. You know, where I'm the rationale all the time, but I'm open to alternative ideas and alternative knowledge. But this is a key piece of information here, Fritz.
Haplo-X is a genetic marker that they find in some of the Native Americans. Now, my belief and my theory in the book is that what they call the Hopewell here was actually a confederation of Cherokee, Iroquois, and Sioux, and they eventually, the Amorites, just got absorbed into these people genetically and culturally. And so what happened was that they left that genetic marker, haplo-X, which has actually been traced back to the Sea of Galilee, and it shows up in more predominantly in those three Native American groups that were all known to be mound builders. So you take historically who were mound builders in the past, and it's those three tribes. Just so happens they also have the most of the haplo-X, which has its roots in the Sea of Galilee. So scientifically, we can even trace that from Ohio back to the biblical Levant.
You know, Fritz, I just see this as you raising the awareness. Is that the outcome that you want, Fritz, to raise awareness of what's going on with these ancient monuments?
Well, yes. You know, it's just trying to disseminate the truth of what I found. This is the evidence that I have of my theories of why I believe this is true. So it's not an agenda. It's just the truth. And the same way over in the British Isles of to say, yeah, this has its roots in the biblical Levant. These were the Amorites, and there is a truism to what the Bible says about the giant race. They did exist, and, you know, this is what they left. You know, in the Bible, in Genesis 11:1, there's kind of a clue, 1:1:1. It says, and now they all had common speech. Well, it wasn't speech per se. It was this numerology and symbolism that went across the world, which is what the Bible says. There was a common speech. So a circle and a dot and 666 and 1080, that is the language they are talking about. That is a common language that's spread across the world. That's the allusion to it. That's why they put it in Genesis 11:1. Just to give you a little clue that, yeah, we're talking about numerology here.
Sure. You know, they say the ancient bardic law of Ireland is point by point almost identical to Sumerian law, you know, as well. It's funny that I took that with a pinch of salt when I heard it until I come across your work, Fritz. But, you know, this is fascinating. I've spoke to Dennis Stone, who's the curator of the American Stonehenge. Does this fit into these guys, Fritz? Is this a different... Is the megaliths... How does the megaliths fit in with the mound builders?
Well, you know, that is kind of an earlier chapter. It's interesting because I believe that, you know, the megaliths were kind of going out around 2000 BC. That was kind of dying. But if they were having people come over here to extract the copper, they were probably settling in the Northeast where you find these megalithic monuments and then extracting it from the Midwest, and it was probably coming out east where they were, where eventually it was put on ships, etc., to go back into the Mediterranean. So it's kind of the chapter one is the megaliths that we have here. And then eventually the megaliths, you know, gave way to more burial mounds and hinges that just had the mounds in them. They were kind of giving up the megalithic, which we find that transition over in Britain, and then we find it here also. So it's relatively small, but we do have that megalithic imprint, you know, here in North America. But it's not as extensive as the mounds and earthworks that you would find in the Ohio Valley that are identical to what you would find in Britain.
Wow, that's fascinating. Do we find anything up in Canada? Is there anything up that far? Is Maine the extent of where these mounds are?
Yeah, there's a little bit in Canada, but it's generally on the St. Lawrence River. And the St. Lawrence is what the Great Lakes feeds out of up into the Northeast. So we'll find some giants just across the river, but nothing extensive up there into Canada. Now, with the Maritime Archaic, we do find some in Vancouver, but now we're looking at 5000 BC, and we're dealing with an earlier people. So, and that's what you have to differentiate. That a giant skeleton doesn't mean it's an Amorite. It could be a Maritime Archaic. So it's kind of disseminating through the giants to say this guy belongs here and this guy belongs here. So that's why the book's been cut up into two sections. So you know what we're talking about. Sure.
Yeah. Tell me about the Earth Mother worship and the Sky Sun Father worship and that part of the ideology.
Everything is based on that. When we're talking about the later Amorites, that, there's always going to be an Earth Mother symbolism and then the Sky Father. And I think you find that over in England. You know, that's another thing, is to look at those sites like Stonehenge, Avebury, Tara there in Ireland, and to know that those two aspects should be evident. And no one, I don't think, has ever done that work over there, is that you need to find those two aspects because they should be incorporated in almost any kind of earthwork site. Yeah,
exactly. You know, it's, again, something I think even we might be ahead of you in terms of awareness of these ancient monuments, like, you know, and but the work still hasn't been done here. I mean, the symbolism and the ideology of what these monuments are and the serpents and all that is still being very little looked into over here, Fritz. Wow, the Nephilim Chronicles. I'm so impressed with the book, Fritz, and I'm really glad that you did the travel guide too, because this is what people are going to need if you want to go and see these monuments. What's the accessibility like if somebody has the travel book and wants to go and see these, Fritz?
Everything is either visible to access the land or is visible from the road. So burial mound that the size of a two-story building may be down a country road. Now, the time to see in America is the winter months. So, you know, all the photographs in my book were taken generally around the 1st of December till about mid-April, because nothing here, or very little of it, is maintained. You don't want to come in the summer months because it's all overgrown. So you come in the winter when everything in the woods has died, and you'll have a good visibility. So it's kind of a winter activity. Sure. In the Ohio Valley. That's the best time to see everything, just because you have an unobstructed view at the earthworks and the mounds.
Sure. Do you see then these mound builders as a race of people? These guys as their own race of people? Is that what we're saying, Fritz?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was this hybrid race. It does show itself occasionally in the genetic pool, but it's certainly not as evident as it would have been 2,000 years ago, because they were absorbed by so many different peoples that, we couldn't go somewhere today and say, well, this is them, and they still survive in a remote village in Bulgaria or something.
Sure. And I guess then these guys, their concepts, their beliefs, their ideology, there was a devolution in it, maybe from megaliths into mounds into, eventually disseminating into whatever, There's a devolution.
Well, that is an interesting aspect, because look what happened with the Amorites. That the laws that we basically have today started with Hammurabi's code. Mathematics that we use today started there. The clock, the foot, the months of the year. There's so many aspects that just exploded. Now, here's something interesting too. The Book of Enoch says that the angels gave this race secrets and knowledge. And if you look of what angel gave, different aspects or different knowledge of, one angel gave them the knowledge of the course of the sun. Well, okay, that's Stonehenge. One gave them the course of the stars. Well, that shows up in earthworks also. Mathematics, how to use metals and how to do that. Well, that's the Bronze Age. So we have an absolute list of what knowledge these people had and how they were using it that shows up in the Book of Enoch, where we can say, like, oh yeah, this is everything that we can find within the earthworks of England, over in Levant, and then in the Ohio Valley. So interesting. Yeah, there seems to be a de-evolution, because this knowledge just exploded onto the world overnight.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Exploded, Fritz. I think what the archaeologists say is that the monuments themselves were evolving, but I don't agree with that. I think maybe evolving in design or evolving in some sort of cultural use of the monuments. But I mean, when you talk about the original concept of these complex megaliths devolving into mounds and then ever smaller sizes and smaller, I mean, we're talking really big stones and really big monuments at the very start and more complex, and they seem to get, just descend into chaos in some sort of as they were absorbed by other peoples, perhaps. Wow, Fritz, give us out your book title one more time, where we can get them, and have you got anything interesting like a conference coming up, or documentaries, or TV, or radio you want to mention?
Well, interesting enough, the television station in Russia, which is called oh my gosh, I can't think of it right now. It's not Soviet. We don't use that word anymore. It's the Russian Federation television.
All right.
Is coming here on Friday. They're actually doing a documentary on the giant race. So they're coming here, and that'll be interesting. So I'm going to be aired nationally in Russia before North America or the Britain. So hopefully they'll follow suit soon. And the title of these books one more time is The Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels in the Ohio Valley, which is available on Amazon, UK, and The Nephilim Chronicles, A Travel Guide to the Ancient Ruins. That even if you want an armchair archaeology trip across the Ohio Valley, I have photographs and, of course, all the historic accounts of mounds and what they found. There's lots of giants, of course, in the travel guide also, because I give the history of if they dug into it and the giant skeletons they found, and some documentation about the sites from the various histories.
Sure. You're on Facebook as well, Fritz?
Excuse me?
You're on Facebook as well. Have you a Facebook page for the book?
Yeah, I have the Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels. I have that on Facebook. I have Giant Human, Skeleton, Blogspot. Generally, if you're going to read a historic account of it online, it's probably one of my blogs. Or you can get a hold of me, Fritz Zimmerman. I'm on Facebook also.
Wow, fascinating.
I generally just talk about mounds. I don't post kitty cats or anything generally on my page.
For sure. No, I just had a little browse of that there. It looks awesome. I can't wait to go and see these monuments, Fritz. I really can't. Thank you for the travel tip coming in winter, because I would never have known. So if anybody wants to get out and see these monuments, get the guidebook, because it's all in the one location. I love that you've done that, Fritz. That's the key thing, because people are going to want to go and see these monuments, especially the Americans lot. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can organize a tour and bring a plane full of folks, and we'll travel around, and I'll give them a guided tour and show them all the symbolism, etc. that's at these sites, and
for sure.
And show them
for sure, yeah, I do. I have a tours events page. I'm actually doing a group of tour people to Malta to see the megaliths over there. I think we could organise something like that, Fritz. I think we could do. But yeah, wow! Thank you for coming on the show. We're at the top of the hour, Fritz. It's been an awesome pleasure having you on the show. Again, I love the subject matter. It's jaw-dropping, if you ask me, Fritz. And I really thank you for your research. I really do. You've done a wealth of research, and you've done a great job on it, Fritz. So, come back anytime, my friend.
I appreciate it. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Fritz.
All right. People, skeletal types that you will find, skull types of the Beaker people who built Stonehenge, are identical to what you'll find here in the Ohio Valley. And that is 3 different people: the corded people that have long heads. You have the Denaric that have these flattened back of the heads. Some may be tied to the Fomorians. And then you had another one that was called Borby, Cro-Magnon or Borby, that type skulls. But all 3 of those were kind of weird upper Paleolithic Cro-Magnon type skulls you would find over in the British Isles, and you find those here in the Ohio Valley. So you have a skull type that matches conical mounds with circles going around them, hinges, same skull type. It's hard to believe that no one has put that together up to this point.
I know, Fritz. This is a no-brainer if you ask me. This is like, oh my God, soak this up, down tools, get all the research focused on this. But, like you talked about the archaeological politics that goes on, I'm with you on that, Fritz. I mean, when you look at all the mounds in Ireland, which has got a lot of art to go with the mounds, and in doing so, that's what I researched and wrote about, Fritz, and that's why Mark put us together for the show. But the archaeologists never hired an astronomer to look at an astronomically aligned monument. They won't do it. they won't bring in the astronomers to look at the astronomy. They don't want to deal with it. It's ridiculous, like, you know. Are you finding the exact same, that the archaeologists are hands off on these monuments? They're their monuments. No,
I'm on the northern fringe of where all the big skeletons and the hinges and the really large burial mounds are.
You know, I'd never heard of henges. I knew there was mounds in the Ohio Valley, but I'd never heard of henges. And I just, like I said in our pre-chat there, we've got some information to roll out about the henges over here and more links. But henges, mounds, this just screams British Isles to me. You know, this is like, wow, it's like, you know, there's obviously a commonality. You know, you got different cultures, yes, different times maybe. You know, there's an obvious link there, Fritz, you know?
Well, yeah, they're, you know, it's sacred geometry and how those match up in over there in the British Isles and then over here. And just to clarify, when people think henge, a henge is a circular earthwork with an interior niche, an outer wall, and then generally a gateway that is going to align to a solar event. So you have Stonehenge, you have the stones in the middle. The hinge is the earthwork and that gateway that is aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. So when I say henge, I'm not necessarily talking about stones in the middle, because over in the British Isles, there's some with stones and some with burial mounds in the center of them. That's what you would find over here. You'd have a henge aligned to a solar event, and then generally there's a mound in the center with burials in it.
Yeah, we have one called here, believe it or not, called the Giant's Ring. It's an earthwork just north. It's inside Belfast City, actually, Fritz. And it's got a dome. Not many people know about it, but it's one of the largest henges known, if not the largest. And it's got a dolmen in the center of it, right in the center of the henge. It's massive, like, you know. But yeah, I mean, fascinating. Like, henges are literally, you know, forgotten about. They're just not exciting to people. Like, but I think what you've done, and we're going to get into some numerology later, is you've applied some numerology to this stuff and looked at these. And my own, I've overlooked some of the stuff for henges too, Fritz. I guess just on the mounds before we go anywhere with the henges, you don't believe in digging these things up, Fritz, is that correct?
No, absolutely not. Here in North America, archaeologists have literally destroyed thousands of burial mounds, and they don't know who the mound builders were, where they came from, nor where they went. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the mounds have just become a venue for archaeologists to write papers and get published in academic journals. And so they don't believe in diffusion. They believe in the Beringia theory, that is the peopling of North America through the ice bridge across Alaska over into Asia. And if it doesn't follow that paradigm, it is completely dismissed, and archaeologists aren't allowed to write diffusionist papers. If they do, they'll be censored, and in a world of publish or perish, their careers will die right there. So everything is being governed by the universities as far as diffusion, which they don't believe in. So that topic is left out of mainstream media and as a topic that should be considered far more than what it is, because in my book, I've definitely proved that there was diffusion and these people. Well, I have a degree in radio, television, communications from Purdue University here in Indiana, and this started out, it was going to be a short documentary, and I wanted to find just several mounds here in northeast Indiana, because I had no idea we had anything that was 2,000 years old in this region. And as I started researching, I kept finding these large skeletons. And then part two of the book is that I have the travel guide, the Nephilim Chronicles, a travel guide to the ancient ruins in the Ohio Valley. And I was doing the field work. Well, I end up finding over 300 of these large skeletons, and I actually did field work. I investigated 700 mound sites in the Ohio Valley, which is 5 states, and that took 13 years. So in my travel guide, I have 222 mound and earthworks that you can go and visit. So finding the giants was one thing. Finding out where the giants came from and the whole backstory, that took a few years. So altogether, 13 years of field work and other research just to tell this story, put those links together from the biblical Levant and the biblical giants, how they made their way into the British Isles, across Europe, and then eventually came here to the Ohio Valley.
Wow. Yeah, and you're in northeast Indiana at the moment, is that correct, Fritz?
Yes.
What's the quantity of mounds up that region then?
Well, I'm in northeast Indiana. We do have mounds up in this region, but the larger mounds and the hinges are in central Indiana, so they're about an hour and a half south of here.
Oh, Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to Capricorn Radio with your host, James Swagger. Today I'm going to be talking to Fritz Zimmermann about his book, The Nephilim Chronicles. And Fritz has looked into the earthworks and the henges on the mounds of the Ohio Valley and on the East Coast, and something that I have delved into a little bit in my research over in the British Isles, but Fritz has also been over this way looking and researching at the British Isles and some of the Nephilim links to the Middle East as well. So what a fascinating show we have today. Just before we bring on Fritz, I just want to mention CapricornRadio.com. You can follow the links for the archives there, all the guests and their biographies, and the links to all their books. Also, we're on Twitter at Capricorn Radio. You can also follow the YouTube channel there on CapricornRadio.com. Follow the links, or simply type into YouTube, James Swagger, DOTCOM. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest today. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, Fritz.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, wow, what an awesome, fascinating subject. You've been researching this for quite a while, Fritz. This is a wealth of research that you have provided in your books, and I guess, like anybody on the show, give us a little bit about your background. Did you get drawn into this by some accident, some little serendipitous accident, or was it a case of, you've been researching history for a while, or how did that happen for you?